Morning, everyone, and welcome to another Search Ads 360 live stream. Today, we're going to talk about parallel tracking. I'm Sebastian, and also joining me from the Madrid office is Alex. And yes, today we're going to talk about parallel tracking. Just a quick reminder, parallel tracking is a Google Ads feature that will be activated for all Google Ads accounts on the 30th of October. So that's yesterday in 3 weeks. And before we dive into the contents, I'm quickly going to go through the agenda. So we'll start with a quick introduction, and then we're going through the 4 steps that are necessary to complete a successful migration. So this one starts with the migration tool, then checking for compatibility, making manual changes, and then test and eventually enable parallel tracking. Then as a final topic, we're quickly touching up on accelerated mobile pages and how we can do conversion tracking on those. And also in the end, we'll host a quick Q&A. Okay, I will start with the intro. And basically the intro is about today's session, because today the session is all about going into detail, like technical details about parallel tracking. We won't repeat the overview about parallel tracking and the basics. There's a recording which you can find also on the same website where you can sign up for those live streams. And the recording will will tell you all about the basics and about parallel tracking. So what are the steps we need to follow in order to migrate or become compatible with parallel tracking? So the first step should, in almost all cases, be using the migration tool. After successful use of the migration tool, we check compatibility in the UI. And then if we have to do manual changes, we do so in the 3rd step. And in the 4th step, once we're sure that we've tested the new tracking templates and that we made all changes necessary, we enable parallel tracking. Quickly, I would like to talk about a common misconception. And the misconception is that the migration tool or running the migration tool will also enable parallel tracking. This is not the case. The migration tool has to be run first in order to migrate certain features that I will go through on the next slide. And then enabling parallel tracking should actually be the last step of the complete migration. So in the end of running the migration tool, then eventually making manual changes and then checking compatibility again and testing whether it works, we can enable parallel tracking. So let's quickly touch up on the features again that are affected. And the features that we're using or that we could use in Search Ads 360 that are affected by parallel tracking are Search Ads 360 macros, the use of the conversion API, using Google Analytics linking, or making use of cross-channel remarketing. Those 4 can be migrated by using the pre-migration tool. And I will go through that in a minute. And then on the other hand, we have some features that we might use in our tracking templates, which are not compatible per se. So there might be some need of doing manual changes if we need them. And for example, if we're using natural search or tracking templates, then we can do some manual changes to become compatible. However, if we're using active landing page tests, such as URL parameters and campaign manager macros, these won't be compatible going forward. For campaign manager macros, there might be some other placeholders or parameters we can use from Google Ads that will give us the same information, but most won't be supported and most won't have a workaround going forward. Search Ads 360 URL parameters, those URL parameters have actually been deprecated in March. So if there are still some URL parameters in place, and if you're getting the warning when checking for compatibility, then most likely you will either need to move them to the tracking template or to the URL suffix if they are still of some use. So the first step is running the migration tool or running the pre-migration tool, and I will explain now how this looks. So just to quickly repeat, we're running the migration tool in order to become compatible when we're using Search Ads 360 macros, the conversion API in Search Ads 360, Google Analytics linking or the Google Analytics integration, or cross-channel remarketing. If we're not using any of those, it's still recommended that we run the migration tool just so that accounts are in a migrated state going forward, if in any case we want to activate some of those features. So before running the migration tool, it's advisable to run a quick sync just to make sure that what we're seeing in Search Ads 360 is the most up-to-date version of our search campaigns. And then from the Engine Account Overview tab in Search Ads 360, we can select a Google Ads account and basically click Edit and click Edit Details, and this will give us this view that we're seeing here in the screenshot. There are basically two tick boxes, one for migrating Search Ads 360 macros, and one for migrating if we're using the Conversion API, Google Analytics, or cross-channel remarketing. It's recommended to activate both those tick boxes before running or when running the migration. But before we do that, we can always check again just by clicking on the View Compatibility Issues button in order to see what's being flagged by the system and which tracking features are currently not compatible with parallel tracking. So if we activate the two tick boxes and then hit Save, we are going to get a quick message that is telling us all about the migration and that we're going to run that. And basically all we need to do is to confirm that we understand the migration. And then we can go back to the Engine Account Overview and actually monitor the progress. We can just add two columns, one for the migration of the API, Google Analytics and remarketing, and one for the migration of the SA360 macros. So first we'll see that the migration is in progress. This will take some time. It might take a little bit longer depending on the account size. And then once the migration is completed, we will actually see that in the interface. And that's basically when we're done with running the migration tool. After running the migration tool, we check the compatibility again in the UI. And now we're also going to show some examples of how that will look, what will happen to Search Ads 360 macros, etc. So basically, once we completed the migration, and we're going to the same window again. So basically selecting one Google Ads account and clicking on Edit Details. We see again the same two tick boxes, but this time they're grayed out. This indicates us that we ran a successful migration. And then just to be sure, we can view the compatibility issues again. And if we're remembering the previous screenshot, then there the Conversion API was flagged. It's not flagged anymore after running the migration successfully. And then we're going to talk about Search Ads 360 macros, because the first part of the migration is basically migrating Search Ads 360 macros and exchanging them in most cases for custom parameters in Google Ads. So on the left-hand side in the column, we're seeing all the Search Ads 360 macros that can be migrated automatically. So if we take one example, we have, for example, the macro on the left-hand side for the search term. So basically this being a placeholder that can be replaced by the actual keyword that is related to the click. And this one would be replaced by the custom parameter in Google Ads, which we set as _DS search term. One more example, which is at the bottom here, is the Google Click ID, so the gclit. And we have a Search Ads 360 macro for the gclit, and this one will be replaced not by a custom parameter, but by a Google Ads value track parameter, which you see here on the right, again, in the same column as the custom parameters. And then at the bottom of the page, we see some Search Ads 360 macros that won't be supported by the migration tool. The one we're seeing here last is for the Google Click Source, and the Google Click Source, how we can basically put a static value for that or in place of that into the tracking templates I'm showing now in a bit. So basically here we're seeing another screenshot of an example redirect that could be in the account on basically engine account level. And if we're seeing something similar to this in the Search Ads 360 engine account settings, then this means that this redirect, this tracking template will follow the Search Ads 360 tracking template, which won't be visible in the Search Ads 360 accounts, but which will be definitely in the underlying Google Ads accounts. And what can we see in this tracking template if we look in a bit more detail? So basically in bold letters, we're seeing a bunch of custom parameters. So for example, we're seeing custom parameters for the DS account type, DS ad group ID, DS campaign ID, etc. We're also seeing the value track parameter from Google Ads for the Google Click ID. And then in red, we're seeing the Google Click Source. So we're seeing after the migration, the Google Click Source is the only parameter that hasn't been migrated in this example. And also here, we're seeing the encoded version of this second redirect that would follow the Search Ads 360 redirect. Okay, here we're seeing the same, just as a decoded version, which is more easily readable. And here we're seeing also the decoded version, but now we replaced, go back quickly, we replaced the Google Click Source Search Ads 360 macro for a static value. So we can do this because the click source for Google Ads accounts will be aw.ds. And this is static for Google Ads accounts. At this point, parallel tracking is something that is only being activated across all Google Ads accounts, and therefore we can just put it as a static value or hard-coded value into our tracking templates. So I quickly showed two versions of the same tracking template or redirect. One was encoded, one was decoded. So basically, if we're using multiple redirects, so here the example we were using would follow the Search Ads 360 redirect. And whenever we're using multiple redirects, so basically one redirect before it pings a click server is going through another click server. Then we need to have the second redirect in this sequence. We need to add it in an encoded version, so we're making sure that special characters will not break up on redirecting to the next redirect. And here we see what happens based on the second tick box in the migration tool. And basically what happens is, this is a screenshot from the Google Ads interface. Basically what happens is that the migration tool automatically adds the Google Click Source with the static value, as we also saw it in the example, into the final URL suffix. And it also adds a parameter, or basically a placeholder for cross-channel remarketing. And with this, we basically completed running the migration tool, and now Alex will take over and talk about manual changes we might need to do.
Thank you very much, Sebastian. So I'm Alex. I am technical specialist for Search Ads 360 based in Madrid office. What we are going to check now is basically if we need to do any check, if we do have to change anything within the current configuration in order to be fully compatible with parallel tracking. So as Sebastian already mentioned, there are some features, some Search Ads 360 features that are no longer compatible with parallel tracking. But there are two that we need to do some modification in order to be fully compatible. So one is natural search, and the other one is the use of tracking templates. So what is going to be the difference? So in Search Ads, basically, we have now two fields. One that is the URL template. It was existing before, but now we are using this field only for third-party URL redirects. And now we have a new field that is final URL suffix that will be used for adding all those parameters that we need them to be available on the final landing page URL. So If we go back to the pre-migration tool and we check and we click on the View Compatibility Issues button, we can see there that the system is still flagging some warnings here. So we will be going through each of those and explaining what do they mean and also what do we have to do to fix them. So the first one is telling us that we are using URL templates that contains SA360 macros. So this is an important one. This is a red one. So basically what this means is we are still using macros from SA360 that were not migrated because they are not they are deprecated. They are not longer supported. So in this specific case, the macro that we are seeing is the GCL SRC. And as Sebastian explained, we have just to switch that for the static value aw.ds, and that should fix the issue here. So once we do that, if we go back to the migration tool, that error should be gone away. So the next warning that the system is highlighting here, and it's marked as yellow because it doesn't mean that there is something wrong. If the system is just telling us that there is something that we need to check, it's basically that we are using URL tracking templates, and we have to make sure that we are putting the correct URL there. So how do we check that? Basically, what we have to do is we go to our advertisers in SA360, we click on the engine accounts tab, and from there, we download a report selecting all the items that can have a URL template associated to. In those cases, are those ones that you can see here. With this, we will have the URL associated or the URL implemented as URL template associated to each item. So we have to make sure that we are using there third-party URLs. And in case that we are using here any information that needs to be available on the final landing page URL, we have to move it to this new field in SA360. We will cover this in a bit. The third error, or the third warning that the system is highlighting here is it's telling us that we have URL templates that contains redirects that are not secure. They are HTTP. So this is not an issue as long as this is not a third-party URL. So if you go through the migration process and you are not using the URL template field, what you will see in SA360 is this escape URL custom parameter. This is the representation of your final landing page URL, and in some instances, this URL will be HTTP or HTTPS. That depends on you. So in case that this URL is HTTP, you will see this warning message, but it doesn't mean that there is something wrong. This is just to make sure that you are not using any third-party redirect that is not HTTPS. And finally, the fourth error that the system is highlighting, and this is a big one too, is telling us that all third-party redirects need to be HTTPS. So in case that you are working with a third-party provider and this third-party provider is not providing you the secure version of the URL, you need to ask them for this. So because otherwise, parallel tracking won't work. So those are the most common scenarios that we can face when we are doing the migration. Once we fix them, we should be able to enable parallel tracking. But before that, what I'm going to explain is how do we work with those URLs. So in this case, what we have is a kind of complex URL. So it's composed by a call to a third party, second call to a third party too, different one. Then we have the landing page URL represented by the custom parameter. And at the very end, what we have are some parameters that we want them to be available in the final landing page URL. So how do we have to put this in SA360 in order to be able to work with parallel tracking? So the first thing, the first third-party redirect, because it's the first redirect, it's the first call that we are making, it doesn't need to be encoded. So basically, we have to just check with the third-party provider that this URL is secure. That is something that you can see there, obviously, but it is not the case. You need to ask for a secure version. And we can check once we are testing or enabling parallel tracking that the third-party provider is receiving the data that they need. So the second URL is for another third party. In this case, we have to check the same things that we already checked with the first one, but what is special in this case is that this is the second jump in the redirection process. So basically, what we need to do here is to encode this URL in order that when the third party receives this URL, it's not chopped or it's not cut or there is not any problem. It's returned totally full, totally complete. So the browser is able to jump to the next step. In this case, it's important to encode everything but the custom parameters, that the pre-migration tool has added to the URL. This is how this URL looks like when it's encoded. So as we can see here, everything is encoded but the custom parameter. And then what we are doing here is like we are appending the second URL to the first URL, plus at the very end we are adding the escaped URL. Why? Because the second URL is also a redirect. The redirect needs the next step. The next step is going to be your landing page. So in this case, what we are doing is telling, okay, this is the landing page that you should be receiving. Maybe the third party needs that information. And also, it's another way that the system knows, okay, we have the landing page here URL, so the redirection process has ended. And what happens with the parameters that we have after the landing page? So basically, those parameters, we are moving them from the URL template section to the final URL suffix section. In this case, we don't need to encode anything because that is going to be appended to the final landing page URL by Google Ads. And we don't need to add any linker between those parameters and the final landing page URL, like, for example, a question mark or the ampersand, because that is done automatically by the system, by SA360. So this is the criteria that the system is applying, basically to add one or the other. And usually the behavior is independent. So it shouldn't be any problem with that. So after you have finished all this, putting these URLs in one place or in the other, this is how it looks like in SA360. This is the way that you would see that. As you can see, there is the first redirect, the second redirect, the landing page URL, and at the very end, you can see the final URL suffix with the parameters that we need in the landing page. And what about natural search? So, as you know, when we are using natural search, the way to differentiate the paid search from the natural search traffic is based on an exclusion parameter that is added to the final landing page URL. So we have to make sure that this exclusion parameter is added to the final URL suffix section. Otherwise, if this exclusion parameter is not there, all the traffic will be considered natural search and will alter our reports. So in case that you are not sure about what is your exclusion parameter, you can reach out to our support team. They will be happy to provide you that detail. And in case that you are using GCLID as an exclusion parameter, you don't need to do anything because this parameter is always appended to the final URL suffix on the Google Ads account. And finally, once you have completed all these steps and your engine account is fully compatible with parallel tracking, you can do two things: test or enable parallel tracking. We always recommend to test it first, and if everything goes fine, then enable parallel tracking. So how you can test parallel tracking? So there are two levels of testing. Basically, you can test how the pre-migration tool is affecting to your Google Ads account. It's basically ticking the second checkbox that says migrate URL parameters from conversion API, Google Analytics, and remarketing for this campaign's final URL suffix. And what this basically does is adds the GCL SRC parameter to the final URL suffix, but also the identifier for remarketing. So that way, you see how it behaves on your Google Ads account, and you can check if everything is fine. And on the other hand, once you have everything ready for parallel tracking, you can check the other checkbox, turn on parallel tracking for this campaign, and check what will be the behavior of your ads and your redirects in Google Ads. So you can go to your Google Ads account and you can go to the campaign settings section, and in there you can test the tracking templates, and the system will tell you if the behavior is fine, if everything is working with parallel tracking, and also without parallel tracking. Once you have tests, you just need to enable parallel tracking. That basically is done at the engine account level. Here you can have all the details. You just need to check this checkbox and save the changes. And the other part that is also affected by parallel tracking, but it's not something that you need to do in SA360, is more about tagging. It's that you need to take into consideration that AMP sites are following a set of rules in order to load faster, to use the Google Cache and everything. So you cannot use the usual floodlight tags that we are using in other sites in order to track conversions. So basically, you need to download the AMP version of the floodlight tags and implement them in the AMP sites. For the rest of the sites, for regular sites, you don't need to retag anything. All the floodlight tags or Google Tag Manager or global site tag are going to work the same, but that is only for AMP sites. You just need to go to SA360, select the floodlight activity that you want to get the tag, select the tag format that would be tag for accelerated mobile pages, AMP, and then you will have the two snippets, the global snippet and the event snippet. You can put it wherever it works. So basically, the global snippet needs to be on all the AMP URLs that you have, and the event snippet needs to be executed when the action that you want to measure happens. And that's it from my side. So now we will be replying questions you may have.
Yes. So we already got a few questions. The first one is, will this be available to view at a later time? And the answer is yes. There will be a recording. It will be published on the same website as where all the live streams are published, where you can see the schedules for the live streams. So if you've registered, you will also get a follow-up about where to find the recording. Then we have another question also. It says, can you use search ads 360 macros in the final URL suffix? So basically, when you follow the guided steps, or basically the steps that we recommend, where you would first run the migration tool or the pre-migration tool, then all search ads 360 macros that we can migrate automatically should already be either custom parameters, or for the Google Click ID, it should be a value track parameter. And at this stage, following those steps, they would still be in the tracking template. And then, of course, those that were previously search ads 360 macros, they need to be moved from the tracking template to the final URL suffix if they need to be sent to the website. And therefore, search ads 360 macros as such, we cannot use in the final URL suffix because then they can't be replaced. So therefore, we need to make sure that search ads 360 macros are migrated first, and then whatever is left over will be added to the final URL suffix.
Yeah, we have another one that is, what about the URL template at engine level? It seems that it is flagging as an issue, but cannot be removed in Search Ads 360. So basically what you are seeing when you are clicking on the view compatibility button, the system is telling you, like, the red ones are things that needs to be fixed, and the yellow ones are things that need to be reviewed. So in that specific case, at engine account level or any other level, if you are not using URL templates, what you would see here would be the landing page URL, the unencoded URL or landing page URL, the custom parameter. So the system is going to tell you, okay, here is a warning. You have something in the URL template. Just make sure that it's what you need. But it's not. You don't have to fix anything. You just have to make sure that if you are using a third-party URL, it has to be in the URL template. And in case that you want any parameter in the final landing page URL, you need to move it from the URL template to the final URL suffix. You will be seeing the warning, but it's not a problem. It's just to let you know that you are using that specific field.
Okay, we have another question, and it says, what about the two below red flags? The first red flag being tracking parameters may not reach the landing page with parallel tracking turned on. So this has to do with what Alex explained. Basically, tracking parameters either need to be sent to redirect, so to a click server URL, a click server that is used by third-party tracking tools such as Search Ads 360, or they need to be sent directly to the website. where they are being picked up by a website analytics tool. And so if those parameters need to be sent to the click server, basically we need to keep them in the tracking template. If they need to be sent to the final URL, to the actual website, because they are meant to go to, they are meant to send information about the campaign, for example, that caused a click in the website analytics tool, then they need to go to the final URL suffix so that they can be sent to the actual website.
Cool.
And then the next red flag being tracking did not reach its final redirect. Alex, do you know this one?
Yes. So basically, all the redirects that we are adding in the URL template section are going to have like a final jump that is going to be the landing page URL. If that landing page URL that you have there does not match with the landing page that you have defined in your campaign, then is when this error is flagged. So you have to make sure that after the redirection process that you have implemented in the URL template section, this redirection process ends up in the landing page URL. You can do it just adding the escaped or unescaped URL custom parameter there, and that's it.
Thanks. So yeah, we have one more question. If we do not do anything until October 30, will it do it by itself automatically? So basically, if nothing happens until the 30th of October, so if none of these steps are being taken until the 30th of October, what will happen is that for Google Ads accounts, parallel tracking will be activated. But the tracking templates that are being used are not compatible with parallel tracking, or at least parts of it are not compatible. So basically what happens then is that non-migrated, non-compatible accounts will become parallel tracking activated, and therefore we might lose tracking, or we're at risk of losing tracking and functionality in the third-party and website analytics tools that depend on this tracking.
Cool. It looks like, we have a new question here. Can we keep adding custom text to URLs in keyword templates for inventory management? So that's a very good question. Inventory management. So basically, the biggest change here would be for, so we need to take into consideration that URL parameters and also final URL suffix fields are inherited. So basically, the one that the system is going to take is the most granular one. So if you are applying a URL template or a final custom parameter at different levels, so if you go to keyword, it would override whatever you have at group level. If you have something at group level, it would override whatever you have at campaign level, and so on and so forth. So in this case, because you are able to add a static test to keyword templates, that static test is going to override the field that you are using. So if you are adding that information into a URL template at keyword level, it would override whatever happens in upper levels. Same story if you are using the final URL suffix.
Yeah, so the final URL, if it's being used at a more granular level, it will override this. But for inventory management, there is no final URL suffix field yet. So basically, if you're using them in the keyword templates for the final URL, so basically adding a parameter like that into the URL, then the suffix should still be appended, because the suffix adds information to the actual landing page URL, whether you apply this on keyword or on ad level. And then the final URL suffix should be placed after this, also using the correct special character. So there's one more question. Do we have to actively delete the tracking templates, the ones we're not actually needing anymore, or will they be deleted on the 30th of October? Tracking templates won't be deleted. They will continue to exist. What we basically have to make sure is that all the parts of the tracking templates that need to go to the final URL or to the actual website are being added to the final URL suffix. Nothing will be deleted. If it's something that you're not using anymore and that doesn't break your tracking in the current state, then it should be fine if you don't delete it. And also, if I assume that if it's something you're not using anymore, that those are tracking templates that are maybe defined on a more granular level for post keywords or post ads, post campaigns, whatever is happening to post entities, you don't need to update those unless you want to reactivate them in the future.
We have another one. Just to be clear, the parallel tracking test at campaign level can only be done in Google Ads, whereas actually enabling it is in SA360, right? So yeah, right. So basically what you do is you go to a campaign details, you enable the test that you want to do is parallel tracking or the pre-migration tool, and then the checks needs to be done on the Google Ads account associated to the campaign.
Yes. Okay, I think that's it for questions and everything. I, from my side, don't have anything to add anymore. Alex, do you have anything else you wanted to add?
All good.
All good. Okay, so thanks for joining in for the live stream today. And the recording will be published on the same website where basically all live streams are published. And yes, if you keep having questions about parallel tracking, our support team is supporting going forward. So you can just chat in straight from the UI or send an email to SA360-support@google.com. So thank you and see you next time.
Thank you very much.